So basically, we were discussing relative validity and pragmatic value of concepts, because we can't immediately, abandon concepts. Rather, we are in a way, even in the Vipassana practice, we are making use of concepts at first, and then we are allowing them to naturally fade away. Certain concepts, for example, while meditating, while you practice Anapanasati, when you experience in breath, assume that you are noting it as in, or in breath, or inhalation. And when you are experiencing out breath, you are noting it as exhalation. So this is also kind of a concept. But in a way, it is useful for us to establish mindfulness using these simple concepts. But later, once mind is well established, probably you can abandon that and keep the mind very quiet. And now the concept is not necessary. That naming is not necessary. Labeling is not necessary. Rather, you can experience breathing in a more silent manner. And while you are experiencing that, probably you can even go deeply. What are the characteristics of breathing and what other phenomena are there? What is the direct experience that you are going through? So that is where we are slowly abandoning the concepts and getting closer to the more realistic understanding of various phenomena. Now in the book, if I come back to page 36, the Madhupindika and Sakkapanya suttas, as well as several suttas like Kalaha Vivada, Chula Vyuha and Maha Vyuha of the Attaka Vagga of the Sutta Nipada, lay practitioners stress on this strange aspect of the Muni. Strange indeed it might appear when in numerous suttas we find the Buddha and the Arahants vigorously debating with the heretics and refuting their views, yet even in the thick of the debate, the sage is silent within and holds himself aloof, since he has no axe to grind, has nothing to gain or lose by it. He has no attachment, tanha, to his arguments, no conceit, mana, to be safeguarded, and no views, ditti, to be dogmatically entertained. Now, this is a very interesting area. Now, suppose that you are in an argument, you are in a kind of a conversation, and more than the conversation, you are probably able to or trying to safeguard your ideas. Now, putting across your idea, your view, your understanding, and you are trying to convince the other person with your ideas. And he also may be putting his own ideas, and there's a kind of an exchange of different ideas. And if there is a kind of a strong ego in you, you may be trying to convince the other person, okay, you are superior, your idea is much better. That is the most best kind of an idea. So this is what happens because we are operating under the influence of our ego. So more than the idea, now our ego comes to the front, and if our idea being not presented, someone else's idea being highlighted, and we feel like defeated, we feel like we are being threatened. That is where the ego comes to the picture, and that is where the different conceit come into the picture. And probably I have a certain attachment to my view, attachment to my idea. That is another area. And on the other hand, I am dogmatically attached to my view, if it is a view. And here further, Katakunda Thero mentioned, perhaps the most remarkable is the last mention. In many a context, it is said that the Muni has abandoned all views. He has no views because he has got rid of the point of view, and that is the illusion of the ego. Here he neither formulates nor proffers any views. Now this is another area, so Sammaditthi. So what is Sammaditthi? So different, say Sammaditthi has different meanings. Even today, during the morning Dhamma sermon, I tried to explain Sammaditthi. So different meanings are there, or we can say explanations are there with respect to the Sammaditthi. And Sammaditthi basically considers about proper view, correct view. And it starts with discussing what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, and what are the roots of wholesomeness, what are the roots of unwholesomeness. So this is very much like based on the Dhamma. So you are understanding or you are accepting the Dhamma. You want to become a good person. You are taking responsibility of your actions. So this is what actually the beginning of the Samadhi. Assume that you were not considered about that. You are not much concerned about that. But now you are concerned about your actions. You are concerned about your speech. You are concerned about your thoughts. Because you heard killing animals is not good. That is not wholesome. It is unwholesome. But protecting them, non-harming, helping is wholesome. On the other hand, stealing is not good. Instead, giving donations, offerings, that is good. And sexual misconduct is not correct, not good. It is unwholesome. Instead, you being a loyal person, a faithful person, a trustworthy person is something good. So likewise, so you are now understanding the difference. You are now trying to understand the difference between the good and the bad, wholesomeness and the unwholesomeness. So likewise, different proper views, correct views is something that you are learning, understanding. Someone else has mentioned that, or you yourself have thought about it. So likewise, you are now getting to Samadhi, and it is actually the beginning. You are going through more and more deep aspects of Samadhi. Now we will get into what Thero mentions. There is, however, a widespread tendency to define the word ditti in such context strictly to mean the traditional list of 62 false views which are ditti as given in the Brahmajala Sutta. The Brahmajala Sutta has 62 views, and among them there are many actually related to deep concentration. And some people who are in deep concentrations can come up with different wrong views. So that is also highlighted there. And there are many eternalist views, there are many annihilationist views. So different views are there in the Brahmajala Sutta. Altogether 62 views are highlighted, mentioned, and very much like a huge list is there. This tendency is evident in the commentaries which, while defining Tanha and Mana in a more elementary form, has to be comprehensive, take great care to be more specific in the case of Ditti. This may be due partly to a complacent belief that the list of 62 comprehends all possible forms of Ditti, and partly also to a desire to safeguard right view, Samadhi. But it appears that this commentarial definition has created new problems. Ditti has thereby lost its fundamental significance as the deep-seated proclivity in the worldling's mind to be beguiled by concepts. If by Ditti Papancha is meant merely the 62 false views, then it would be possible for the disciple of the Buddha to put an end to Ditti Papancha by virtue of the very fact that he has given up false views. But as we have shown above, it persists even in the disciple as the notion of an ego until he attains Nibbana. Besides the tendency towards Ditti in the sense of dogmatic involvement in concepts can also become manifest through Samadhi in its theoretical aspect. It can assume the form of attachment to concepts which constitutes Samadhi. It is precisely this danger that the Buddha warns against in the parable of the raft in the Alagadugama Sutta. Therein the Buddha declares in unmistakable terms that he is preaching the Dhamma, which is comparable to a raft, just for the purpose of crossing over the sea of samsara and not for grasping dogmatically. After crossing over, even the Dhammas have to be discarded, not to speak of the Adhammas. That is, what does not pertain to Dhamma. The parable, which is so instructive as to merit analysis, runs thus. So basically, this is a very, very interesting area where how we sometimes even grasp correct views. Say, when we are learning Dhamma, when we are, say, studying Dhamma, so we may become really interested about Dhamma and we start memorizing that, we start gathering that, writing that. So all that are actually very useful because it is inspiring, it helps to overcome various doubts and helps to properly practice. So all are very necessary. But anyway, at one point, we should be able to keep it aside. And sometimes Dhamma-related thoughts may often come to the mind. And could be possible that they may be even disturbing. And actually, this has been discussed in the Pansudovaka Sutta after explaining various gross kind of thoughts, say Kama Vitakka, sensuality-related thoughts, Vyapada Vitakka, thoughts of ill will, and then what we call Vihinsa Vitakka. Those are the thoughts of doing some harm to others. So those are in a way, the harmful thoughts, unwholesome thoughts. So those are also explained and that can be also abandoned. Then Buddha explains about some subtle thoughts, say thoughts about the relatives, thoughts about the country, thoughts about the region, the politics, and maybe about your health, about your reputation, about gains, fames. Those are also thoughts. So those also can have to be abandoned. Very subtle thoughts. And when you are able to overcome all that kind of thinking, then the Dhamma Vitakka are possible. And it doesn't mean that Dhamma Vitakkas are coming only at that stage. They may come at any level. But even when these gross, unwholesome thoughts are abandoned, even the subtle thoughts are abandoned, still the Dhamma thoughts, the thoughts related to Dhamma are possible. And at that time, even that thoughts are to be abandoned. We should see how they are coming, how they are going, how they are rising, how they are passing away, how they are appearing, how they are disappearing. So even the Dhamma thoughts can be used for Vipassana. Here we are not trying to develop Dhamma Anusati, thinking about the Dhamma, contemplating about the Dhamma. Rather, we are practicing Vipassana, where we see they are also merely thoughts. They are also subject to impermanence. They also come and go, and we don't need to promote it. Simply, we can abandon them. So they also show the universal characteristics. They are also impermanent. They are also unsatisfactory. They are also non-self. So Buddha, in this Alagadhyopama Sutta, Venerable Jnanananda highlights how Buddha explains that even the Dhamma are to be abandoned. Monks, as a man going along a highway, might see a great stretch of water. The hither bank dangerous and frightening, the farther bank secure, not frightening. But if there were not a boat for crossing by or a bridge across for going from the not beyond to the beyond, this might occur to him. This is a great stretch of water. Suppose that I have collected grass, sticks, branches, and foliage, and having tied a raft, depending on that raft and striving with hands and feet, should cross over safely to the beyond. Then monks, that man, having collected grass, and striving with hands and feet, might cross over safely to the beyond. To him crossed over, gone beyond, this might occur. Now this raft has been very useful to me. I depending on this raft and striving with my hands and feet crossed over safely to the beyond. Suppose now that I, having put this raft on my head or having lifted it onto my shoulder, should proceed as I desire. What do you think about this, monks? If that man does this, is he doing what should be done with the raft? Then the monks answer as no, Lord. What should that man do? Monks, in order to do what should be done with that raft. In this case, monks, it might occur to that man who has crossed over, gone beyond. Now, this raft has been very useful to me. Depending on this raft and striving with my hands and feet, I have crossed over safely to the beyond. Suppose now that I have beached this raft on dry ground, or having submerged it under the water, should proceed as I decide. In doing this, monks, that man would doing that what should be done with that raft. Even so, monks, it's the parable of the raft Dhamma, taught by me for crossing over, not for retaining. You monks, by understanding the parable of the raft, should get rid of even of right mental objects, all the more of wrong objects. Eomeva ko bhikkave kullupamo maya dhammo desito nittaranattaya no gahanattaya. Kullupamango bhikkave dhamman desitam ajanante hi dhamma pivo pahatabba pageva adhamma. So this is a very important statement made by the Buddha. So he's the only teacher mentioned Dhamma as a raft. So he's teaching as a raft. So kind of a guideline. So we have to use it, properly use it. And once it is used, once the purpose is done, you can abandon that. It is not something to grasp. It is not something to hold on. It's not something completely to attach with. Rather, once the purpose is done, so the mind has to be kept in the liberated state, completely unattached state. So this is very important to understand. By the way, it doesn't mean that we are ready to throw the Dhamma, delete the Dhamma, even before we become Arahants. So we need to be very clear that this is possible to abandon the Dhamma because its purpose is all done only for the Arahants. Till that, we may need Dhamma. We may need certain guidance. So that's why even the Arahants, or rather even the Anagamis, non-returners, they are studying, they may be discussing, and probably you can refer the Khemaka Sutta. So Venerable Khemaka, being a non-returner, he is actually giving a really interesting discourse to the others. Other monks are also listening. So they do kind of hold some understanding, some theories, and they are discussing that. So this has some purpose. But once one becomes an Arahant, so it doesn't mean now he has to carry the Dhamma or memorize the Dhamma, hold that, attach to that. Rather, he can keep it aside. Thus, the parable of raft is a typical illustration of the relative and pragmatic value of Dhamma. The raft is improvised out of the straight twigs and branches growing on the hither bank. By merely boarding the raft, by clutching at it, by decorating it with more twigs and branches, one does not arrive at the farther bank. One has to exert oneself, having embarked for the beyond, and has gradually to cross over with the aid of the craft. Once he has reached the farther bank, he has to disembark. He has to abandon and disown the raft. He might, however, out of compassion, instruct those living on the hither bank as to how they should build similar rafts for themselves. But for his part, he no longer needs a raft. He has realized that the raft is useful and meaningful at the hither bank, as it is the product of the twigs and branches growing there. Similarly, Dhamma, which constitutes the theoretical content of Samadhi, is improvised out of the medium of language and logic in the worldly parlance. By merely mastering it, by dogmatically clinging to it, by clothing it with more concepts, one does not reach the goal. One has to exert oneself spiritually, having mastered the Dhamma, in order to attain Nibbana. Now, after his attainment, the pragmatic value of the Dhamma is lost for him. But as he is now convinced of its value for the suffering worldlings, he might preach it to them out of disinterested compassion. As for the truth value of the Dhamma, it has its validity from the worldling's point of view, as it is presented through the media familiar to him. Thus, the truth value of Dhamma, of Samadhi, pertains to the path, and it is essentially a view of the goal, and not the goal itself. Dhamma or Samadhi, we may add, is neither more nor less true of the goal than the raft of the farther bank. Being a form of ditti or view, it presupposes a viewpoint, and it is or ought to be the viewpoint of the Aryan disciple. As we have earlier pointed out, the emancipated sage has no viewpoint. Instead, he needs none, as he has reached the goal. He has transcended all views of truth and is in possession of a vision of it. Thus, we arrive at another paradox, as in the case of the silence of the Muni. The sage does not entertain any views, not only when he refutes Michaditti, but also when he preaches Samaditi. It may also be mentioned that the Samaditi itself embodies the seed of its own transcendence, as its purpose is to purge the mind of all views, inclusive of himself. This dialectic aspect of Dhamma has had a staggering effect on the society to which it was first preached, and the Buddha himself refers to it in the Alagadubama Sutta. Ida bhikkhu ekachassa evang ditti hoti. So loko so atta so pecca bhavisami. Nicho duvo sasato aviparinama dhammo. Sattva samam tatheva tassamiti. So sunati tathagatasya va tathagata savakasya va sabbesang dittithana pariyutthana abhinivesa anusayanam samuggahataya sabba sankhara samataya sabbupadi patinissagaya tanhakkayaya viragaya nirodhaya dhammang desen tassa evang hoti uchijjissami namasu vinassissami namasu nasu nama bhavissami iti. So sochati kilamati parivedayati urattaling kandati sammohang apajjati evaଂ ko bhikkhu ajjattang asati paritassana hoti iti. Basically, so here in this statement, so Buddha discuss about the abandonment of various views, and again the discussing about the impermanence, because understanding impermanence is actually part of samadhi. This also explained in certain suttas. So if one is able to understand the impermanence of the aggregates, form aggregate, feelings, perceptions, etc., so that is where he has another kind of samadhi. That is also samadhi actually. So here actually when someone is teaching it, certain other people, say for example, if there are Brahmas, Devas who are enjoying long lifespan, millions, billions, years of lifespan, so they can't even believe it. They can't even understand what these are mentioned, because they were there for long, long time. And they start shivering, they start sort of frightening, hearing the Buddha's teaching, because in their parlance, everything was permanent. They were there forever. But now Buddha says it is impermanent. You are going to die. This is not a permanent lifespan. Ultimately, you will die. So when it is being mentioned, so they start really troubled, really upset, really disturbed. In this case, monks, the view occurs to someone. This is the world. This is the self. After dying, I will become permanent, lasting, eternal, not liable to change. I will stand fast like unto the eternal. He hears Dhamma as it is being taught by the Tathagata or by a disciple of the Tathagata, for rooting out all resolve for bias, tendency and addiction to view and causal relation, for tranquilizing all the preparations, for casting away all attachment, for the destruction of craving, for dispassion, cessation, nibbana. It occurs to him thus, I will surely be annihilated. I will surely be destroyed. I will surely not be. He grieves, mourns, laments, beats its breast, and falls into disillusionment. Thus, monks, there comes to be anxiety about something subjective that does not exist. Now here, we need to understand one important thing. So all these ascetics, all these Brahmins, all these Devas, Brahmas, they are of the view of a personality. They are of the view of a self. They think there is a self, and that self going to annihilate, that self going to be destroyed. So that personality view, that self view, that Michaditti is completely there. So that is where they become really frightened. They are of the view that there is a person here. There is someone here. So that someone is the one going to die. That someone is in trouble. That someone is the one actually going to get into this situation. So I am going to die. So this person is going to die. So this is the kind of a view they are having. So that is something we need to understand. So that's why they become really frightened, thinking there is a person, I am an individual. This individual, this I, going to perish. This I going to destroy. This I going to annihilate. So they become frightened. Thus, Sammaditthi aims at the utter eradication of all views, together with propensities towards the same. The entire conceptual structure has to leave through gradually, and in the final reckoning, even those concepts that have rendered us the greatest help in our spiritual endeavor have to make their bow. As such, one must be extremely cautious in regard to concepts pertaining to Samadhi. One might distinguish between the relatively true and false in theory, between the precise and the vague in terminology, between the scholastic and the wavered in phraseology. But one has to remember that as concepts they are all one. Nor should one seriously regard some concepts as absolute and inviolable categories in preference to others, and pack them up in watertight cartons labeled Paramattha. Indeed, he may regard some concepts as Paramattha in the sense that they are more conducive to the attainment of the goal than others. Truer, more precise and more scholastic. In this connection, we may also add that the word Paramattha, in its earlier and non-technical usage, actually meant the highest goal as the object of realization, and any words tending towards that goal were called Paramattha Sanghita, connected with the highest goal, irrespective of their precision or technicality. However, the Buddha, for his part, was content to treat all of them as sammuti. For him, they were merely worldly conventions in common use, which he made use of without clinging to them. Now, without clinging to them. So, Buddha has used many concepts. He taught the Dhamma using many concepts, many maybe using a language, but knowing it is a language, knowing its limitations. So therefore, these are something that we need to understand, and we have come to a certain level. That is, we need languages, we need concepts to understand even the Buddha's teaching, and we are making use of them. And slowly, we are calming down the mind, relaxing the mind, abandoning various views, wrong views. And once, say, one become an arahant, so according to Venerable Jnanananda, so this right view is something even able to abandon that very view. That means nothing to hold on to. And we can say he has completely penetrated wrong views. Okay, I think that is enough for today. Now I like to open the session for questions.
Awesome, sir. We have 4 questions today.
Right.
Question number 1 of 4 is on the Dhamma sermon actually. It's Dear Bante, last time you explained briefly about dependent arising cycle. How can one realize these deep Dhamma during the practice of mindfulness? As you explained some time back regarding desire and other hindrances, do we understand this gradually based on our own observational experience, or do we have to do special contemplation at some point to realize dependent arising? Much merits for your service, Bante. That's the end of the question.
Actually, in the practice of vipassana, we can to some extent try to understand the dependent origination. Purposely, you can try to understand Paticca. That is also possible. But on the other hand, gradually also it can happen. Because, say, for example, you are cleansing the mind, you are basically try to calm down the mind, relax the mind, and again calming down the mind. Probably naturally you may understand, okay, when I-making is not there. When there is no personality, when there is no ignorance, my mind is calmed down. My mind is relaxed. So one link, avidya paccha sankhara, sankhara paccha vijnana. So more we are ignorant, more there are ignorance, more will be thoughts, more will be thinking, overthinking, proliferation. But when no ignorance, less ignorance, mind prefers to be calmed down, prefers to relax. So these are one areas. Actually, you slowly understand. And probably when certain feelings are available, then naturally there may be a desire to attach to them, and I want to keep them, I like them, I want them. Likewise, feelings are conditioning to craving. On the other hand, we can say craving is conditioned by feelings. Vedana paccha tanha. When there are, say, pleasurable feelings, we start naturally like them. We start naturally desire them. So that means that link also possible to understand. So likewise, as you gradually practice, there may be a possibility for you to purposely look at this conditioned nature, how certain links are operating. And on the other hand, maybe you can even purposely do that. Like say, for example, while walking, you can see how contact conditions feeling. So when your foot touches the ground, you may start feeling. So contact conditions feeling. Passa paccha vedana. So likewise, there are certain areas that you can actually experience during meditation. I mean, Patissamuppada related, dependent origination related links are there for us to experiment during meditation.
Question number 2 of 5. This is on mindful walking. Dear Venerable Sir, thank you for this program, which has helped many of us start a spiritual journey. I have been practicing mindfulness for some time under your guidance and can establish mindfulness on the breath and the walking process within several minutes into the practice. During walking practice, after the initial phase of establishing mindfulness, my mind drifts away but comes back after some time. This happens within 10 to 15 seconds. Based on Venerable's advice, I have lowered the effort of getting back to the main observation immediately when I notice getting distracted. I often get alerted by this but try not to bring back attention immediately to the walking process. I observe that the mind comes back slowly to the walking practice with this awareness. However, after another minute, it drifts again. During the last 30 minutes of a session, this drifting and coming back happens again and again. This has been happening for some time now. My intention is to keep going like this, but thought of checking with Venerable as well. Much merits. That's the end of the question.
I think you can continue as it is, because you are trying to allow things naturally settled, rather than you are interfere in the process, suppress any kind of thoughts. You allow them to naturally fade away and then come back to the say primary object. That is much better, a better approach, rather than stressfully with some tension bring your attention back to the object forcefully. That can actually create some amount of tension because of the practice even. Rather than doing that, so you establish mindfulness and you see where the mind, and you see it is not with the primary object, it is being distracted, but you are not in a hurry to quickly take it back. Rather, you see how natural it is coming back. That is, I think, more mature way of doing it. I think you better continue as it is. It will take some time, by the way, for the mind to return to the primary object using this method. But definitely, the motivation is there for it to associate the primary object. As a result of that, the mind may return back to the primary object.
Question number 3 of 5. This is a general question. Dear Bhante, I am a newcomer and started mindfulness practice recently. I have a young family and trying to manage work and day-to-day life with some balance. What is the practical way of adding a practice as well to this already busy life? I don't know it is possible to wake up at 5 a.m. and meditate every day or after office hours in the long term. Also, I know that this day-to-day struggle won't get me anywhere spiritually as well. Should I somehow squeeze time and see how it goes, or take it easy and continue with light touch as I do today? With metta, that's the end of the question.
Actually, you need to continue the life in the sense that you have to continue your, say, the occupation and your other tasks that is essential for you to survive. At the same time, if you can dedicate little bit more, that also will be helpful, because if we are slack in the practice, if we are having really less time to practice, so your progress will be very limited, very slow. On the other hand, if you are able to maybe not to 5 a.m., but at least say 5:15, probably you can wake up. So you need some amount of energy, some amount of dedication, because we can't expect that the practice to develop naturally. Definitely we need some amount of effort, particularly at the beginning, because a lot of hindrances are there, certain lethargic tendencies are there in the mind to practice. So you need fair amount of driving in a way at the beginning. But as you practice, your mind become more and more tamed, more and more mindful, and then you can see, okay, now the mind has somewhat tamed. Now the mind is capable of establishing mindfulness easily. Less scattering, less distractions. So these are the positive aspects that you can notice, and you yourself can see them. Then probably you can do some minor adjustments. Actually, then rather than doing minor adjustments to stop or to minimize practice, your mind will even become encouraged to practice, because you yourself experiencing the benefits. So therefore, I suggest you to spend little more time in the practice. So don't expect it to happen naturally or by itself without your participation at the beginning. You need certain amount of driving, you need certain amount of encouragement, some amount of dedication. Otherwise, it won't happen.
Question number 4 of 5 is a Dhammasaman question. Dear Bhante, I joined today to the program when Bhante started explaining Sammaditthi. As I understood, the first definition is more or less understanding and protecting the 5 precepts. Is this correct? And at least enough for lay people like us, Bhante? With metta, that's the end of the question.
To some extent, correct, because in the Samadhitti Sutta, that is where Venerable Sariputta starts. It's not actually the 5 precepts. We can say the 10 wholesome activities and 10 unwholesome activities. It has 5 precepts, in detail. Now, and on top of that, he adds akusala moolancha pajanati, kusala moolancha pajanati. And okay, where are the roots also? So it is not mere observation you are practicing the 5 precepts or 10 wholesome activities, and you will do some sort of a sense about the mind also. Suppose, say for example, you are about to kill an animal, and when that thought appears, probably there may be little dosa, little hatred, ill will in your mind. If you are clever enough, probably you can notice how ill will being sort of promoting killing. How ill will being sort of indicating, asking you to kill the animal. So ill will, in that sense, is the real root cause, and the product, the result, is the killing. So likewise, the roots are also being recognized. Alobha, adosa, amosa as the wholesome roots, lobha, dosa, moha as the unwholesome roots. So one can understand these unwholesome roots, and that will actually help further to do a kind of an introspection, understanding more deeply about the Sammaditthi. So that's why Venerable Sariputta does not merely stop at the talking of mere protecting of 5 precepts. He talks about the bodily activities, verbal activities, and mental activities. Bodily activities are killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Verbal activities are lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chattering. Mental activities are into the, say, more into covetousness, hatred, and to the wrong view. And the opposite is there for the wholesome deeds, wholesome side. Little more into, I feel it is more than the 5 precepts he's talking.
Question number 5 of 5. This is also Dhammasamma question. Is there anything called I don't know what that word is. Shall I put it in the chat?
Probably you can share. Yeah. Yeah.
It is written in English, but sorry.
Uh-huh.
No English and Sinhala both. I don't want to say the wrong word. That's why.
Is there anything called paramattha, Bhante? If the highest form of samadhi or the right view is also not paramattha, see if there is nothing paramattha. Appreciate Bhante's explanation. So that is what actually Venerable Jnanananda want to highlight, because in the, let me share his words. So now there's a tendency in the later editions of Dhamma telling, okay, there is something called paramattha, and only those are the ones available. Not everything else are sammuti. Paramattha satcha and the sammuti satcha. So that is how it is being divided. Now, Venerable Jnanananda in a way refutes it. He says there is nothing as such, and no point of telling that these concepts are paramattha, these are really important. Everything else is sammuti, these are just the mere conventions. So rather than saying so, he simply say, however, the Buddha, for his part, was content to treat all of them as sammuti. For him, they were merely worldly conventions in common use, which he made use of without clinging to them. Now, I feel even for paramattha, if something is available as such, we don't need to attach. I think Buddha particularly highlights about the abandonment. So if we think, okay, there are certain things called paramattha and they are more important, I should attach to them, I should hold them, they are the paramattha, they are the supreme type of things. That is also kind of an attachment we are promoting. So that's what Venerable Jnanananda tries to highlight here. Rather than categorizing certain teachings or certain say areas, certain teachings as some paramattha and others are conventional. So what we are trying to do is to understand that the certain may be useful, certain teachings may be useful than the others. Certain teachings may be, or teachings or certain dhammas may be superficially useful to some extent, but not directly. And so we are categorizing, okay, these are very important. You need to pay attention. You need to pay close attention. Now, say, for example, Parissamuppada. So these are really deep Dhamma. And probably we may need some time. We may need some effort to understand it. And more than that, we may need some time to realize it. Not superficially understanding, but even experience it more deeply. It may take time. So that is an important Dhamma, some higher Dhamma that we are talking of. But interesting thing is, even what we are experiencing, say for example, avijja pacca sankhara, sankhara pacca vijnana, vijnana pacca namarapa. Likewise, all these different links, as a result of the practice, have to be faded away. They have to slowly disappear. They have to slowly abandon. So they naturally start fading away. So even though it is difficult to understanding it And even though we feel that is more important because of the practice, so these different links consisting of the Parisamuppada also start fading away. So nothing to hold, nothing to attach. So that's the beauty of the Dhamma. So it is nothing is there for us to hold on, and everything is there for us to in a way penetrate and to abandon. So the mind become more open, freed, than holding anything. I feel that is what Venerable Jnananda want to highlight. So telling that when Sammaditthi being practiced, it has its own component ultimately to abandon even that. So now say for example, when you are practicing Sammaditthi, and if it has a certain part, ultimately even to wash it away, that's a different kind of a point that we are highlighting. But I can remember when Analio was telling something different, basically telling that now, say for example, in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, that's a common phrase that you may be all familiar with. Dittincha anupagamma sīlavā dassanena sampanno kāmesu vinayya gedham naijātu gabbasiyam punareti. Now it is talking about a non-returner. Dittincha anupagamma. He doesn't come to any kind of a view. He doesn't dogmatically, theoretically, or he doesn't purposely grasp any kind of a view. But Dittincha anupagamma sīla dassanena sampanno. He has a vision. He has a clear vision. So basically, whenever Analio highlights that even though we say there is all the ditthis views are abandoned, now he has a clear vision. He has a kind of a direction. Okay, this is the way that I have to go through. And more he is practicing that, his mind become relaxed, calm, especially about that ditti, that correct view. So the correct view has the capacity to calm down, capacity to non-proliferate, capacity to abandon, capacity to release the mind than to attach the mind. Back to you, Chamila.
We have come to the end of the written questions. We have about 10 minutes. Can we allow, or we will any questions? Yeah.
Okay, I prefer to wind up because there's a retreat going on currently at Nissarana, and it is also in English. Probably you all can join to listen to the Dhamma sermon. It will be from 4 p.m. That is just after, say, 40 minutes ahead. From 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. It will be in English medium. Dhamma sermon.
Okay. Yes. So we'd like to end the program now. To end the program, I would first like to pass our merits and thank Bhante for his valuable time, even with the busy schedule at the monastery. To all the supporters of this program, both seen and unseen, and to the participants for joining today to practice and share their questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thero and Sadhu.